In today's devotional, we'll continue to read and listen about Paul's experience and engagement with the Judaizers, or those who wanted to compromise the good news of the grace alone and faith alone message of the gospel. Paul says, then after an interval of 14 years from his visit to some of the apostles in Jerusalem, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas. You remember Barnabas was his missionary companion, and also taking along Titus, who was a disciple of Paul and to whom Paul wrote the epistle to Titus, and who was a Gentile. Now, the trip was based on a revelation that I went up and I set before them the good news, which I proclaimed among the Gentiles. Now, I set before them the good news in private to those who were considered as significant publicly, to make sure that I was not running or had run in vain. Paul was not so arrogant to not be teachable, and he wanted that revelation from God to be affirmed. He goes on to say, I set the good news before them privately to those who were considered significant publicly, to make sure that I was not running or had run in vain. Now, understand this, Paul says, not even Titus, who was with me, though he was a Greek, he was not compelled to be circumcised. That's the conclusion of Acts chapter 15. Gentile doesn't have to become a Jew to become a Christian. But because of covert false brethren who snuck in to closely examine or evaluate our liberty, which we have in Messiah Jesus, they purposed to bring us into slavery of the law. But we did not yield in submission to them for even an hour, for the purpose that the truth of the gospel would remain with you. The truth that it is not by works. But for those who were considered significant, what they were makes no difference to me, since God does not receive a person based on their face or appearance, because those who were of considered significance contributed nothing to my good news. They didn't change it. Faith alone, grace alone, in Christ alone. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And I do have 2 posts on my website that go over the gospel, the essence of it, and what is the best way to present it. Verse 7, on the contrary, when they perceived that I had been entrusted with the good news to the uncircumcised, just as Peter was entrusted with the good news to the circumcised, understand this, that he who effectually worked through Peter in his apostolic mission to the circumcised, or the Jews, effectually worked through me also to the Gentiles. And those considered significant publicly recognized the grace that had been given to me. James, Cephas, and John, who were considered significant to be pillars, that we go to the Gentiles and that they were sent to the circumcised. The main thing that I asked was to remember the poor, particularly the poor of Jerusalem, something I was also eager to do. They said, you go to the uncircumcised. We will focus on the Jewish population, and let's all of us remember the poor. You don't have to become a Jew or anything else to become a Christian. Faith alone, in Christ alone, because of his grace, death, burial, and resurrection alone.